Thank you very much, Adam. Can you all hear me okay? Very good. Thank you very much, Adam. And I am delighted to have this opportunity to moderate an excellent session and an excellent panelist set that we have here today. That constitutes a very vast set of experience and geographical distribution of operators, experts in cybersecurity, in policy, in projects, across operations, deploying this over decades. So I'm honored and really happy to be moderating this session. So what we're going to be focusing on today, and I will turn it over to the panelists to just do a quick introduction of each of yourselves, if you don't mind, and just take about 30 seconds or so to sort of, tell a little bit about yourself in your own words. But I think the way that we're going to, go through this today is focus on the challenges in cybersecurity, the strategies that we have ongoing, and also kind of where we can be looking at from an actionable set of approaches that we can take, each one of us can potentially take. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to our panelists just to give a quick introduction on themselves. Susan, maybe why don't I start with you, Susan Peterson?
Thanks, Sridhar. I'm really happy to join you all virtually and happy to join this discussion. I've been in the cybersecurity space in operational technology for about 10 years now. Started out in supporting some automation customers in the oil and gas space and looking at how they could secure their automation systems, and then later led product cybersecurity for GE Oil and Gas. And through that journey, a lot has changed in how we approach cyber. And I think a key thing is to think about consistently our modalities, how we do our work, having an agile mindset, and moving away from a very kind of rigid standards-based approach, which is more compliance, but moving more into an enabling, kind of empowering mentality around supporting new ways of working and the realities that our colleagues see on the ground.
Good, very good. Well, thank you very much, Susan. Very good to have you here. Michael, maybe I'll turn it over to you next.
So my name is Michael Lewis. I am the cybersecurity and technology strategy planner at Chevron. I've been at Chevron 39 years, mostly in IT roles. Been in cybersecurity, information protection for about the last 21 years now, with responsibilities with our strategy. Led a couple of architecture strategy efforts back in 2005 and 2011, and have been involved in the refreshing of our strategies the last couple of times through.
Fantastic. Very good to have you here, Michael. Sharul, maybe I'll turn it over to you next. Sharul Rashid, joining us from Malaysia at PETRONAS.
Sridhar, hi. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I am Sharul Abdul Rashid from PETRONAS. I am a group technical authority, instrument and control. I've been in PETRONAS for more than 30 years. I'm now leading the PETRONAS UTI cybersecurity organization, deploying the cybersecurity project for a 2 years time frame, starting in 2019 until end of 2021. With that, back to you, Sridhar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharul. And then, our last panelist here, not the least, to Dr. Marcio Silva. Marcio, I'll turn it over to you to do a quick introduction as well.
Hello, good morning from Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Marcio Wagner. I'm transfer and storage manager currently in Petrobras. I work at Petrobras around 11 years. And nowadays, I understand, our company understand that cybersecurity is a key topic for any player in the downstream industry. The increasing connectivity of our process plants requires deep attention with this topic. Thank you.
Fantastic. Again, thank you all, and a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. So as we embark on this, Adam, you mentioned the topic around cybersecurity was brought up a couple of times. So what I thought maybe what we can first perhaps spend a few minutes on to hear from some of you is the challenges that are being faced today in this, the threats that we are all facing as operators, as technology providers, as people that are trying to implement and execute these. What are some of the risks and the challenges that we're looking at from a cybersecurity perspective, in the OT environment specifically? I think, if I may say so. So perhaps I'll start with maybe Michael. Perhaps you can give us your thoughts on how you're facing this at Chevron and kind of what you're seeing here. You're on mute, Michael.
There we go. Technical difficulties. So we tend to divide our threat actors into about 4 or 5 buckets, depending on how we want to slice them up. At the bottom of the buckets are the opportunists. They're the ones that are looking for open doors or just things that are not locked down properly. They're probably less of a threat to the OT environments if they're set up properly. Obviously, if you have a control system on the internet, that may be a problem, but that's also somewhat called suicide, so you don't really want to be doing that. But if you've got standard procedures in place, that stops the opportunists. Up the ladder, we would have the hacktivists, which are folks that are trying to do cyber activities because of a cause or something of that nature. Again, they may be able to marshal multiple resources, probably pretty good at denial of service. But once again, if you've got really good protections in place, they're probably not as much of a threat to an OT environment. Where you get into the more interesting areas with the nation states or the cyber criminals, they have more sophisticated techniques. They are likely to be able to get into an IT environment and maybe within there be able to branch out to an OT environment. They have techniques that they may actually have understandings of the control systems in which they can affect attacks like what happened in Ukraine of the power systems, or they may be able to unleash things like ransomware that could take the systems down. So I'll probably stop there.
No, that's very very, very interesting. Maybe I'll turn it over to Marcio to see if you have other thoughts on kind of what you're seeing in your part of the world, in your neck of the woods, in terms of the challenges, kind of beyond what Michael talked about here.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand that to the downstream industry, the main threats of the cybersecurity is related to the process safety and the reliability of our process plants. I understand that this is a necessity to identify the main risks and manage these risks in the investments in cybersecurity and the cybersecurity culture in the company needs to achieve the same priority of the other capital investments in the downstream sector.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right in terms of just the types of investments that are required. Susan, maybe yesterday as we were talking earlier, you had mentioned some of the challenges just in terms of people and sort of the risks in terms of just education and enablement. Perhaps you can maybe share some of your insights around that in terms of where do you see the risk of just not knowing about and being aware of some of these things from a risk perspective are?
Yeah, so in the US, kind of the median age of an energy worker overall is about 56. And so we have a lot of risk about folks that have tremendous amount of knowledge of specific assets, and the process control systems that are kind of moving toward the latter part of their career. So we need to retain their know-how. And at the same time, in the oil and gas industry, we have a tremendous amount of pressure to lean out our organizations. So the amount of adoption that we've seen around remote has been phenomenal. So having remote operation centers, remote centers of expertise, that adoption rate has been massive over COVID. And one of the real challenges that we face is in the OT space, everything in the past we've treated as a trusted domain, where, in the IT space, we would say it's a zero trust environment. And so we really need to move away from kind of rules-based, very static-based types of, technology to secure those OT networks, and really move more into ways to restrict specific types of connection flows and command types, and be a bit more agile to adopt our security or shift our security kind of a posture given the adoption of remote. So I see that as a really big challenge that involves people and process and technology.
Yeah, very, very true. And Sharul, I think you have talked about in the past sort of this difference in ways that we need to think about from an old world culture to sort of a new world culture, and the risks that we need to be aware of from that perspective. Can you maybe comment a little bit on what do you believe some of these new culture risks are that we need to be aware of, and then we can get to perhaps at a later time in the conversation as to how we want to overcome it.
Okay, thank you, Sridhar. Okay, let me approach your question from different angle. First,
Okay.
I would like to define risk. Risk is equal to probability times consequences. Okay, the consequences itself have three terms or three components. It can come from integrity consequences. It can come in terms of availability consequences, and it can come in terms of confidentiality consequences. Okay, in Petronas, we have two people affected by this, which is the IT space and the OT space. The IT is being the enterprise, the guy at the office. The OT being the man, the floor level, the asset which is running the plant, producing oil and gas, and also petrochemical that in Petronas. So the risk has always been there since the day one of we established the organization. It is just a matter of prioritization. It is just a matter of realization and priorities. For in the past, cybersecurity has always been on the IT side. OT has never thought about cybersecurity risk. It has not been. It was not until by 2012. The OT cybersecurity has been emerging to Petronas. That's why we have established our instrument and control group to take care of this cybersecurity part on the OT cybersecurity. And at the same time, we have IT cybersecurity, which is handled by the IT group, by the group digital, by group IT group. So when come IT and OT, there has a clash. The IT try to actually control or try to put the governance on the OT side. And the OT say, hey, come on, you cannot trespass my area. This is my area. You don't know nuts about my area. You can cause my plant trip if you do things which is not within the governance of the OT. So there is a clash, and we have to actually, when come to this cyber threat, we have to work as a single enterprise so that we can work together. Convergence IT and OT, or right now they call it fusion. So that by having an enterprise, single enterprise IT OT convergent fusion, we are able to address attack from the outside in the enterprise manner. I will stop there. Thank you very much, Sridhar.
No, thank you, Sharul. And I think that's a very, very insightful comment there, because you're absolutely right. Even, as an AI provider, AI-based security provider company with SparkCognition over the last 3 years, as we have been thinking about, the OT-based security offerings, I think that was one of the most insightful learnings that we came across is kind of what you realized probably about 8 years ago or so at Petronas, is the notion that, the need for OT security, especially now, is continuing to rise. Michael, you mentioned the nation state threats and where some of these assets that we have within the OT space in the energy industry is, are technically critical infrastructure for cities. And so it is a little bit of a clash, and it is a little bit of a challenge in terms of who runs it, who manages it. Is it in the security organization? Is it in the operations division? And how do you sort of align together, work together? So maybe we switch gears a little bit towards sort of what are some of the ways that we can start thinking about strategizing as as leaders in companies, as heads of operations, as potentially security heads, right? CISOs and that group, and also within individual projects. So if you look at all of these different aspects, perhaps we can maybe hear from each of you, your perspectives on what are some strategies that companies can begin to apply and deploy as they start thinking about this space, more seriously over the next, 4, 5, 6 years, for example. So, so maybe Susan, I'll start with you this time and see kind of what your thoughts are and what your insights are.
So I feel like I feel old now, just having gone through this whole evolution. I worked at a very, very big automation company, and we took a risk-based approach, which was very important, and I appreciated very much that point, and very kind of compliance-driven and looking at product security. So, I think we need to evolve our views about risk and kind of about how we're operating the assets themselves. And again, I go to the remote piece. So I think having a more flexible, kind of empowered security culture is very important in how we empower our colleagues. The thing that gets me pretty excited, if I look at the nexus of digital and cyber, right, is that a lot of times we have many different stakeholders, IT, different parts of operations, process automation, et cetera, looking at the assets with a slightly different cut on them, right? And so this focus that we see around data ops, I think, is really, really exciting, because I think it's one of the potential benefit, not only, for example, if I think about a security operations center, not only to look at data flows, but also to have a context of the operations and the criticality. And so what I get very excited about right now is the potential to empower our colleagues and give them a ton of context. And I think that would be very much a byproduct of the push toward digital and that push toward data ops that we see in many, many of our peer companies in oil and gas.
Fantastic. And you're absolutely right, especially as we digitize our assets even more, so put data and compute at places where we never did, maybe even 20 years ago. I think it opens up the aperture for risk and being able to mitigate risk appropriately as well. Michael, maybe if I turn over to you, you've in the past, you've participated in sort of the workshops for NIST as standards were being set. You've sort of influenced and grown the program at Chevron, significantly over the years. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, the role that standards play in the compliance, or vice versa, that companies play in influencing standards, and maybe also your thoughts on, how do you sort of grow the talent pool, right? How do we sort of ensure the next generation of talent, to Susan's point, is aware of, is thinking about what are some of the programs that companies can do in this space?
So originally, when we first started looking at standards, which was probably about 20 years ago now, we built our own. We bought some off the shelf, and then what we call Chevronized them, which is put specific things to them that were specific to Chevron. And we made them really, really prescriptive back then, because what we really wanted to do was tell people exactly how to comply. And that worked originally, since this is back around the 2002, 2001 timeframe, were about the only attackers we were worried about or could see were opportunists. As attackers become more sophisticated and become much better at getting through defenses and into operating environments, that approach ended up being more of an albatross around our neck, to start using poetic references there, than actually being very useful. And so we actually basically scrapped that entire program a few years ago and utilized the NIST cybersecurity framework as the basis for all of our controls. And we also used the NIST 853 standard on top of that as overlay for process control, which is 882. And that gives us common language that we can point to that anybody can access for free. So if our vendors or suppliers or third parties want to see what we're doing, they can take a look at it there. But we've also extended the use of the CSF cybersecurity framework into other areas as well. When we create our strategies now, we produce our reports and what we intend to do, our initiatives within each of the 5 functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, to make sure that we're covering our defense in depth, not only in the prevention areas, but also in the detection and the recovery and the response areas. We do our communications in that manner. So just about all aspects of our cybersecurity program are couched within the cybersecurity framework. From a personnel standpoint, one of the things that we did, God, it's almost 16 years ago now, to try to address that IT-OT gap or conflict that was mentioned earlier, was to create a liaison within the IT organization for OT. And what we did was take an engineer from the OT space who was respected over there and basically put them into the IT organization. So that gave the OT folks someone they could trust to talk with when they had to get something across to the IT folks. On the other hand, it also provided the IT folks an ability to communicate directly to the OT. And we've had that position now since that for about 15, 16 years. And it really has smoothed over some of the possible conflicts we may have had between OT and IT. We also incorporate our OT strategy into our IT strategy, or both put them together into one cybersecurity strategy, because as we go through the digitalization now, and you mentioned it already, there's data that's coming out of OT systems that needs to be processed on the IT side. There's more and more connection going on. You can claim IoT itself is the combination of IT and OT, if you want to go that far. And so you can't just handle these systems separately. And so there has to be a common strategy going. There have to be differences, as we've talked about, but we need to look at them from one lens. From a personnel standpoint, one of the things that we've done is to create associations with some local universities. Ours happens to be the University of Texas in San Antonio. And what we have done with them is to work with them to help build their cybersecurity program, and also take in interns from their programs and others who will work for the summers. And if they are satisfactory, they will have jobs waiting for them within Chevron once they are through with their college careers. So that's a way of getting people into the company who are young, much younger than the median age, or the age that I'm at, which I'll leave nameless at the moment. But also get them some familiarity with what type of cybersecurity activities go on within the oil and gas industry. Obviously, if you have someone interested in cryptography, writing new cryptographic algorithms, probably not going to be much of a position for you at a Chevron, since we don't tend to do that. But if you want to support the process control environments, or go into the risk assessment, or one of the other areas that we have jobs open, that's the type of program that you can specialize in college and then take those skills into the company as an intern first, and then into our regular job.
Fantastic, Michael. Very, very interesting. By the way, we, as a provider of cybersecurity software, an AI company providing cybersecurity software in both IT and OT, we actually do have positions around that space in terms of writing new ways and developing sort of new machine learning approaches to prevent threats. So, shameless plug here, but those are certainly opportunities that I think we would do. We would open up for people. And I do want to remind the audience here that we will open up for questions from the audience in a few minutes. So I believe you are welcome to submit your questions if you want our panelists to answer in a few minutes. But maybe I'll turn over to you, Marcio, perhaps as you look at sort of leading projects, leading programs within the downstream space that are sort of more tactical in nature, that are maybe looking at the next 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or so, how do you incorporate and how do you bring the thinking for cybersecurity? What are some things that you're doing sort of more consciously to bring some of that thinking in, and maybe how can we sort of start looking at it from that?
Thank you. Very good question, Sridhar. I understand that we need to build cybersecurity maturity level in all aspects in the company. In Petrobras, I totally agree with Susan and Michael. In Petrobras, we are trying to act in the 3 points in people and processes and technology. And recently, we conclude a training course to develop the cybersecurity awareness in our not only the technical people, not only the IT people. I understand that we need to create the cybersecurity culture in any employee. So I understand that mainly in the automation and projects needs to consider the aspects of cybersecurity. For example, the risk analysis, result analysis of the processes needs to consider, and we start this job recently to consider the cyber attack in the control systems of our process plants. I understand that we need to spread this practice and this culture in our process engineers.
Very, very, very true, especially as we are doing more and more companies are continuing to do these automation projects. I think it becomes even more relevant. Sharul, one of the things, if I may turn it over to you, one of the things that, studies have shown is, anywhere from up to 60 to 70% of the threats are insider threats, right? Either because of erratic behavior, because intentional, various reasons. There's obviously others as well. Digital physical attacks, for example, are more in vogue now. Can you comment a little bit on what are some ways that, maybe first your perspective and your insights in that space, and also what are some ways to battle that? What are some ways to mitigate some of that companies can be looking at, especially in the OT space?
Okay, thank you, Sridhar. Okay, the strongest link is the weakest link. Okay, so it means if you have a very good defense, but your internal, your people, erratic behavior means to say that they are doing something which expose the company to the cyber attacker. They make the attacker easy to attack. The vector of attacks is very open. So what we are doing is we are building what we call human defense, human firewall. We call it human firewall. Okay, we have done done this program. We call it accelerating cybersecurity culture in the workplace. What we do is that we go around the PETRONAS organization. We explained in detail. We conduct 2-3 hours trainings explaining why they need to behave the way they have to behave, why they need to ensure they have to, for example, using the USB lock to properly lock the USB so that it will not be open and anybody can inject the virus into the USB port. Why they need to be aware of any potential phishing email, because an email can contain antivirus by the attacker. Why they need to ensure locking their computer at all time. Why they have to make sure the security card are not lost, not getting into a wrong person. So we do this aggressive training so that they understand that their behavior that behavior, the erratic behavior, can cause company into, I would say, into a bankruptcy, because if if Petronas is being attacked, for example, we can go bankrupt. Yeah, to the extent. So when Petronas go bankrupt, you will lose your income, not only the company but you yourself, affecting the family. So we use uh, this methodology, the influence model, foster understanding by conviction. Then a role model meaning to say that we as a leader, we have to show that we actually also behave the way we are supposed to behave. We have to make sure that we make sure that we put a USB, all the USB port are being closed. We make sure that we practice good cybersecurity behavior. So we have to do role model. And number three, we have to provide the tools. We have to train them. We have to buy the tool. If you say you have to close your USB port, you have to give them the USB port. There are actually a tool that you can actually lock your USB port, for example, because everybody use laptop and the port is actually open. So they have to actually lock the port. So this is very important. In Petronas, for example, we actually have this policy. We disable the port. So if you want to use a port, you have to have a special permission to that extent, because we deem port as is a threat to company, because anybody can inject virus. So, and number four is that if they don't behave, we will actually give consequences of management. Or if they behave, we give them a reward, a pat on the back. So we have this influence model that we actually put in force so that they will behave. So this is part of the process. This is part of safety culture, accelerating safety culture. Thank you, Sridhar. Back to you.
Thanks, Sharul, and that's very insightful. So essentially what I'm hearing you say is sort of be more locked down by default and then open only as needed, rather than the other way around, where you keep things open and then prevent sort of lockdown as incidents occur. So certainly, a very good way of sort of thinking about and looking at it. One of the things that we were discussing earlier in the week as we were talking was specifically around the challenges within the downstream assets and the OT assets. Susan, you mentioned the age of OT assets, for example, being a key challenge, where in the IT space, assets last for 3 to 5 years. In the OT space, they're probably 4 to 6 times longer, so they can be anywhere from 25 to 40 years. We faced this challenge as we were developing our OT, offering for cybersecurity as well, where we had to take some of the most leading edge AI models and run it on a Windows 2000 system. And we actually had to go look for a Windows 2000 system as we went back 20 years, and Windows XP system. But there are a lot of technological challenges, right? From the compute and processing power, from the ability or the lack of desire to patch systems on a frequent basis in the OT space, to the degrees of connectivity. So for example, if you think about midstream, downstream assets, the connectivity is not as reliable as well. So if we sort of think about some of the technological challenges, we talked about process and some of the people challenges. But if you talk about technology challenges, what are some of the approaches that you are applying for taking a defense in depth mantra? I think, Michael, you mentioned that. And again, Sharul, you reinstated some of that, as you not only are protecting the endpoint, but you're protecting the, sort of the entry points into the endpoint as well, including USB ports, et cetera, where you lock those down. So if we maybe focus a little bit on some of the technological, approaches that you're taking to protect, whether it's in the network, whether it's at the endpoint, whether it's in the cloud, all of these different approaches, given the challenges. I think that would be very interesting to hear, each of your perspectives. The other thing that, we've also found, I think, Susan, you mentioned with the COVID, has accelerated and exacerbated the problem because of the, the ability or the inability for most people to be at the plant at all times, right? So being able to sort of transcend networks has also caused challenges. So, Marcio, maybe I'll start with you this time to hear kind of what, what, as you go through some of the automation projects, what are some of the types of, characteristics you're looking at from these technology providers or technical providers and solutions as you protect the environment, as you think about wanting to protect the assets going forward?
Well, thank you. Very good question, Sridhar. In Petrobras, we are trying to remove the threat of the obsolete technologies in our process plants, especially the critical systems that we understand that is a vulnerability point. And as quoted earlier, we are invested a lot of time, resources, and efforts to training our people and to register and controlling the access of data with restricted to the people that we need to access this data. And our plan is to maintain our systems up to date with the current technology, even to minimize the risk of the obsolescence. We understand that the obsolete technologies can be a gate to the cyber threats.
Very good. Susan, your thoughts on the types of technology challenges that need to be overcome and the types of things that you would, expect to have within these technology solutions that we're providing, that are being provided? You're on mute, Susan. Still can't hear you. We'll come back to you in a second. Unable to hear you, but Michael, maybe you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah. So our basic premise with OT security, at least for the traditional approach, has been to separate, and we continue to still do that types of approach. So we don't have our process control systems connected to the internet directly. Obviously, they are connected to the business network or IT network, but through the standard, demilitarized zone DMZ type of approach, where you can't go directly in. There's a lot of pressure, of course, to move away from that as we digitalize and we start having to pull data from the process control systems to analyze that through artificial intelligence, machine learning, looking for insights. There's a lot more need for connectivity. And so right now we're restructuring our architecture to permit that type of activity to run a little bit more smoothly. We are collecting a lot of data from IoT devices right now because those devices may be more compromisable, if that's a word, than some of the other systems we have. We have those separated so they can collect the data, send it up to the cloud or wherever it needs to go. But they're on a separate network themselves. So if they are compromised, the attacker gets the data, which probably is not that much. This list of temperatures isn't that interesting to anybody, and certainly not monetizable. But they aren't going to get into the process control system. We're also looking at some of the newer technologies. There's some thoughts of looking at software-defined networks to provide for better resilience and reliability within the process control networks. We don't have that deployed yet, but we're looking at it. And I think Susan mentioned earlier the use of remote activities. We have, during the pandemic, gone to use of HoloLens and other virtual augmented reality type of systems that will allow an expert to visit a remote location, hopefully with someone there, to do inspections or make changes without having to actually physically travel there. So we've been using that extensively during the pandemic, and probably will continue to do so afterwards, since it obviously cuts down on travel and allows that central resource, which Susan mentioned again, that we have or have fewer and fewer of, to be able to use in multiple locations.
That's actually very interesting insight, Michael, in terms of using the virtual and AR and VR technologies like HoloLens it probably comes with its own challenges as well. While it does sort of simplify things in certain areas, but I'm sure there are other aspects which kind of open up the aperture, I guess, or the vector from an attack perspective in different ways, right? Attack surface in different ways. So very fascinating. If we have time, I would love to maybe double click a little bit on on some of those challenges as we come back to that. But maybe I'll turn it back to you, Susan, if we have your audio issue sorted out, and see if you can maybe share your thoughts. Perfect. Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this started with us kind of adopting IT tech into our OT space, and so I get very excited about the emergence of kind of new players, specifically around OT security. A lot of them were kind of born out of having very nascent relationships with automation vendors, which was not super successful because, if I'm a Petronas or Chevron, I don't want to have to buy a different security widget for each automation system. So I think that industry has matured, and what I'm seeing is very cool and fits with kind of the relatively static nature of process automation. But by being able to add in devices that are actively monitoring traffic, that have knowledge of the protocols and APIs, of the typical commands and patterns, and then being able to inform stakeholders when things are anomalous, or being able to change rule sets in a pretty dynamic way, that really fits within the OT space. And so there are a number of companies that are emerging with that type of technology that is built for purpose. And they're thinking about things like UX and skill set of our colleagues that will be managing these devices. So I'm very excited about seeing the emergence of this new category of technology.
Very true. And, I will come back to you all to ask you about, what some of the biggest gaps are. But before I do that, let me go back to Sharul. Let me go to you, Sharul, and see kind of what your thoughts are in terms of as you're taking these steps at Petronas, for example, in terms of sort of setting up your OT strategy or IT strategy. What are you seeing the technology providers sort of doing or not doing in terms of being able to help in that journey?
Okay, thank you, Sridhar. Okay, before I respond to that technology thing, just to give some overview, when we launched the cybersecurity initiative back in 2018, the enterprise-wide cybersecurity strategy, we started off with the setting up the cybersecurity framework. That's number one. So that cybersecurity is looking from a single enterprise line. We appointed our CISO, the cybersecurity information security officer. Number two, we come up with what we call vulnerability management, identity access management, vulnerability management, cyber defense, and also the management of change, where the culture is all inside that management of change. So the question now, where the technology is? Okay, the technology will support the vulnerability management initiative, the identity and access management initiative, and cyber defense initiative. So the three work stream, we require technology selection that will support PETRONAS initiative. When it comes to vulnerability management, for example, we are looking for the support for when I'm from OT, I'm instrument and control, taking charge of the plant asset. So we want to make sure all the Windows machines are protected, having the latest Windows update, and it is being able to be updated in terms of antivirus and also the patching through the network. We want to avoid using the USB stick that we carry around, used to be carry around in our pocket. We used to be carry around in an envelope that where the vendor coming in, arriving at the plant, and then bring the USB stick and stick into our machine, which is very dangerous. We can get infected. So we are looking for ways to make sure that the continuous patching and antivirus management are done through the safe, secure network. And also the cyber defense, we're looking for a technology that be able to do scouting of what is there in the world that can provide the threat, what do you call it, threat intelligence. Threat intelligence and also threat detection. So we have this, we call OTAM, OT asset management, that we be able to detect any abnormal activity within the OT network. So this kind of technology are being brought on board through a proper selection to make sure that it achieves PETRONAS objective for a cyber secure environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharul. And if I may maybe just stick with you and come back around this time, you know, as you mentioned, there are certain things that, you know, operators, large operators like yourselves are starting to do. There are certain things that you're stopping and saying, you know, don't do these within your own internal organizations. And there are other things you're saying, you know, keep doing this, right? This is not changing. Let's keep doing this. These are minimum table stakes. So if you don't mind, maybe share a couple of things that, you know, you already did mention some of the things that you are stopping to do, for example, locking down USB ports and using sort of network-based updates on operating systems, keeping your operating systems current, etc. But what are some other things maybe across any of these three categories of new things to do, things to not do anymore, or things to keep doing, right, and which is very, very important? Maybe if you can share just a couple of those ideas that we haven't talked about already, and then you know, I'll ask the same question of our other panelists as well.
Okay, thank you, Sridhar. Okay, we have to understand that cybersecurity is only came in not from day one. It only came in for PETRONAS in 2012. It was there before, but it was deep in our. We don't even realize it, but it was made realized by 2012. The one has been in existence was HSE. So HSE has been there established since day one. So we have to look at the success story of HSE, how they actually make people compliance to HSE. So use the same model, and we take that model into the implementation and deployment of cybersecurity culture. Example in case, we have the HSE awareness. Every day when the contractor come in, the new staff coming in, we give them a briefing, HSE briefing. So when the contractor come to site, we give a compulsory mandatory HSE briefing. So why can't we HSE briefing? The cybersecurity briefing, maybe less than 5 minutes, 3-5 minutes, showing the USB stick that they shouldn't bring in, for example. So we should incorporate the cybersecurity element into the HSE, which is already established since day one. So by doing that, we are able to do a seamless cybersecurity awareness into the organization without any burden to the owner, to the staff. That's number one. Number two is, in terms of response, we have this emergency response, HSE emergency response. They have emergency drill. Every year they have this desktop drill. 3 years they will have actual drill. So connected to the authority. So why can't we incorporate that cybersecurity drill into the HSE drill? For example, we put in element of OT system being corrupted, attacked by the attacker, and then we incorporate the element into the HSE. Meaning to say, we lost DCS, for example, we lost the controller because of the attack. But because you lose the controller cannot shut down the plant properly, for example, causing uncontrolled flare and explosion, for example. That is HSE. Explosion is HSE. So we built that scenario of cyber attack culminating in HSE impact into the emergency drill. So by doing that, everybody on board will be bring to the level that we never before had. So everybody will start asking, hey, what is this drill? What is this DCS? What is this? How the attacker can come in? There's a lot of questions. That will trigger the education. Thank you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Sharul. Very, very. I love that. I love the analogy to health and safety, HSE, and cybersecurity, and sort of put safety and security sort of hand in hand and have similar types of programs. Because you're right, safety has been around. Health and safety, approaches for an safe environment has been around at the oil and gas companies for for centuries, possibly, right? Or certainly over a century, and sort of merging that, having a lot more alignment with the security side is fascinating. So very, very interesting. Marcio, maybe I'll turn it over to you and see what is something that we should absolutely not do, or should start doing, or continue doing.
Okay, thank you. Well, for this discussion, we can perceive that the cybersecurity is a reality and a necessity for the downstream industry. And I understand that the downstream operators should consider avoid the unnecessary interconnections between the systems. This needs to be deeply analyzed case by case by the operators. And I strongly believe that we need to develop cybersecurity maturity and culture in all level of employees, not only the IT personnel. We can, for example, develop the team with the cyber attack simulations, for example, to improve the awareness of our teams related to cyber attacks. Other question is to, like you said, is to consider the cyber attacks in any phase of new projects, and consider the cyber security in the risk analysis of the process units, even in brown root processes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Marcio. Very, very insightful. I think, as you said, to me, that is very, very important as a takeaway, is to make sure that we're considering the risk and the mitigation of that risk at every single stage of a project that we embark on, and are, irrespective of where we are on the maturity curve as an organization. Every single project, I think, allows us to do this bottoms up. Which actually, I'm going to shift a little bit, slightly different question here, perhaps, as I pose to you, Michael and Susan, just to sort of, as our audiences are asking some questions. One of the things that I think has been resonating really well with our audience today is the need for and the focus on culture. And the cybersecurity culture, as Sharul mentioned, each of you have sort of mentioned it in different ways. So if I may, maybe I'll ask you this, Susan, is, culture is very important. It's having an open, honest, sort of valued culture where there's constant communication, effective communication, trust that is, being established across different organizational boundaries, across different sort of suppliers, vendors, in the entire sort of supply chain. It's not just within the organization, but also across, is really where I think this is important. However, given the pandemic, given some of the economic situations, there's also constant challenges in terms of being able to reduce investments in certain areas, right? So how do you sort of manage and monitor behaviors across the entire portfolio of technology, people, processes, et cetera, especially where, when investment is not sort of completely open, and the purse strings are a little bit more tight now than they were before, as we've heard in multiple conversations. So maybe some thoughts or some ideas from you, Susan, perhaps?
Yeah, so I love Sharul's point about really working with people and kind of culture. I remember probably 11 years ago going in and trying to speak. This was post Stuxnet, so not exactly right after Stuxnet, but having a discussion with chief engineers about, network security, and almost getting at that point laughed out of laughed out of an office. And I think what's very important is this notion of treating cyber as sort of a change management or a transformational kind of exercise, and really having a service. So a lot like HSC, our colleagues in HSC, having a service-oriented mindset where we're trying to bring people along. So this isn't, again, it's moving away from kind of a compliance culture. Certainly meeting standards are important, but really trying to build up a culture around cybersecurity. So I loved comments from Sharul and Marcio and Michael about building that up. I think the thing that is really important is, I think as our colleagues are all looking for ways to kind of grow their careers and, areas of specialization. So one of the things that I think has been most effective is offering cross-training types of opportunities, creating titles like chief types of roles around cybersecurity. From a transparency perspective, I love being able to engage with colleagues in the security community and understanding how they are kind of building the reference architecture, where they want to be. I think that the discussions in the vendor community with end users have become much more robust around where they aspire to be as well. So I think that's super positive. But I think those are the things, really having kind of a change management mindset, bringing people along with you, and having windows where you can, have the transparency with your, kind of your supply chain, your ecosystem. And, to Michael's point, even the culture around NIST, right? And having that as a reference, as a standard, and being able to, openly share that with your vendor community and work toward that as an industry is very, very powerful. One last thing, the most effective thing that I did was running incident response exercises. So to Sharul's point, that is incredibly, and Marcio's point, that is incredibly powerful to get people into the context, right? So a kind of a transformational event, I think, in oil and gas companies to run those types of incident response exercises.
Fantastic, Susan. Thank you for that. I know we only have about a little over 2 minutes left here, so I'm going to ask you all for giving maybe just a sentence or two on this last question, which I think is also important and builds off of this one that you just answered, Susan. Cybersecurity culture is really important, and the human factor is really key and critical as we embark on this journey. So what are some of the most effective ways to improve the awareness culture, cyber awareness culture, in a bottoms-up approach, right, in a hierarchical approach? Michael, I know you're sort of driving a lot of this at Chevron, so maybe I'll start with you. And then if I may just ask you all to just keep your responses very brief so that we can give everybody an opportunity to close this out on time. That'd be fantastic. Michael?
So we have a simple one that was came off of what we used to do with safety, which we call our operational excellence moment. That's before any meeting, usually in person, which is a little bit more difficult now. We would take 5 minutes to talk about cybersecurity activity. It might be a recent attack. It might be something you could do to make things better, something along those natures. So basically, every time one goes to a meeting, which obviously a large corporation is like 3 times an hour, but leaving that aside, you get a reinforcement of some type of cybersecurity activity.
I love that. Such an actionable item that any of us can do, and all of us should be doing, in an everyday perspective. Love that, Michael. Marcio, one actionable item in terms of how can we improve the culture?
Well, I'm totally agree with Michael. I understand that the cybersecurity needs to make a daily topic with our teams, and I think that a very good way to talk about this is to analyze in the basic roots of the attacks in other industries or in oil and gas industry to spread the information. And an example we have some recent attacks, and I understand that we need to work to spread this information for our teams. And another point is the continuous training of the workforce regarding the cybersecurity, and to create the cybersecurity culture and the awareness, improve the awareness of the team regarding the cybersecurity in any point of the downstream business. Thank you.
Yep, fantastic. Sharul, if I may ask you just to say one thing, one sentence or so. I think we're just about out of time, so just one sentence. Any closing thought on an actionable item?
Definitely, Sridhar, the phishing email, that's a big threat to company because the phishing, they try to steal our company credential. That's my top priority. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Susan, one closing thought before we wrap
partnering with vocational or training groups to create the next generation of OT cyber experts, I think, is something that we can all do.
I love it, and very, very useful insights. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists here for your very valuable insights. To me, just as I summarize this in terms of making people aware of the risks, as you said, Marcio, and letting people know how important this is, the analogy to HSE and the ability to do drills, as well as kind of, Michael, what you mentioned, maybe just spend every day at least 5 minutes or so a day in a meeting or across meetings to be thinking about what action am I taking today on cybersecurity to make myself aware and to make my colleagues aware. Including the entire ecosystem. Susan, if I may summarize, kind of broaden your statement, ecosystem of sort of partners, universities, academia, the next generation of thinkers and doers in this space, it would be sort of fascinating. And Chirul, a lot of very interesting sort of insights from you in terms of, starting from phishing emails and USB port lockdowns at the smallest level, all the way to sort of figuring out how to bring this awareness across the company and the organization. To me, those are very, very valuable takeaways. So hopefully our audience has learned as much about the cybersecurity awareness and actions and strategies as I did. So again, very, very much want to sincerely thank all of our panelists here. And Adam, I will turn it back over to you.